All right, James, hope you're ready. We are going pretty bold with today's video.
Oh no, what have you got us wearing this time?
Yeah, hang on, not like that. We are throwing the triathlon rulebook out of the window, along with everything you thought you knew about triathlon training.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Base miles.
What about them?
They're going in the bin, mate.
Wow, what's wrong with base miles? What did they ever do wrong?
Well, maybe you should be asking, what haven't they been doing? Yeah, think about that.
What does that even mean?
So for many of us, we're in the off season. As you can see, we are in the depths of the winter here in the UK. So that can mean just one thing, lots of long, steady miles, base miles. That's what we've been led to understand we need, right?
Yeah, I hear you, Mark. And you're right, this is quite an interesting subject because for years the wisdom has been that you do base miles in the off season. But there's an argument now that might not be the best thing, especially for time-crunched amateur athletes who just don't have the time to do those long miles.
Yeah, see, I knew you'd come around to it. Now, the idea behind this base mileage method is that by putting in these long, steady miles, you're building up a solid aerobic and endurance base, hence the name base mileage or base training.
Yeah, you can think of it like a pyramid. In the off-season, you build a big, broad base, and then closer to race season, you add in the race-specific stuff and put the peak on that pyramid just before the race.
Exactly. But how much you do of each of these phases varies from athlete to athlete. But one thing that always stays the same is this long base training phase. And there's a good reason for that, because by doing these base miles, it can help to increase the amount of blood that we can deliver to our muscles by increasing our capillary density.
Yeah, not just that. Base miles can also increase your mitochondrial density, which increases your ability to break down food into usable energy in your muscles. Basically, you can burn more carbs and fat per minute, which can increase your maximum sustained power or pace. Basically, you'll be able to go faster for longer.
I mean, it all sounds pretty good. I mean, what's not to like about it? Why am I suggesting we throw this one away?
Well, if you are suggesting we throw it away, why are we riding now? Why don't we just get another coffee while we talk about this?
That's a really, yeah, good idea, actually. So, I guess the crux of this is basically the time that you have available to train. Now, to really make these physiological benefits and effects that we were talking about earlier, you need to be putting in some serious hours of training. I'm not just talking about a meaty weekend ride here and there. I'm talking about day-to-day consistent hours of training, 20 to 25 hours plus of training week in, week out, which for anyone with a job, family, other commitments other than training, it's going to be pretty hard to do.
Yeah, and they might work for the professionals because it's their job, but it's not really practical for an amateur athlete. And I guess if you think about it, if you're doing more hours or the same hours because you don't have time to do any more hours, but at lower intensities to get your base miles, you're not actually stressing an aerobic system that you've already adapted. So you're not going to get those physiological strain, which is going to lead to adaptation, which is going to make you fitter. In fact, dropping down to base miles might actually make you slower.
Interesting, yeah, exactly. Now, to be clear, we are not saying you should cut all lower intensity workout from your training program. In fact, we are still advocating lower intensity periods of training to manage workload, to make sure that you're not overtraining, and ultimately make sure that you peak for events. So I guess the big question is, can you still make these physiological adaptations without the base mileage training? In theory, yes.
Yeah, and the way you do this is with high intensity interval training. Basically, it's reverse periodization. It's doing the high intensity earlier in the session, in the season, and carrying that throughout the season. You might already be doing these intervals. They're the higher zones, the zone 5, the FTP threshold or above, or the 5K race pace on the run.
Yeah, and there have been countless studies into this. So one in particular that stands out from 2008 with exercise physiologist Carl Bergermaster. That study concluded that short, high-intensity intervals actually helped mitochondrial development. Essentially, the amount of energy that's being transported and delivered to the muscles. As I say, it's not the only study of its kind.
this obviously works out perfectly for time-crunched amateur athletes. It's a time-efficient method of training. You can get many of the same benefits with much fewer hours of training. Obviously, for some things like long-distance racing, you do still need to get the longer sessions in, but you can use these shorter sessions to supplement your training and do the longer sessions a lot less frequently, keeping the total volume for a week a lot lower.
Exactly, and it goes without saying that these high intensity intervals or speed work that you may end up doing as a result of that could mean that you run the risk of burnout or injury. So don't go throwing yourself straight into this. Make sure that you either seek some advice beforehand or gradually build into it, and make sure that you're still factoring in those easier days, that recovery. You're not just simply suddenly doing high intensity for every single session.
No, of course not. Obviously today we've thrown out the base miles, but we're doing that in jest. You're still going to do some base miles, you're still going to do some easier work, and it's not all or nothing. You don't have to do all high intensity or all base miles. In fact, you can find a balance, or you can switch during your season. If you have a week off work, you could do a whole week of just slow and low intensity base miles before you get back to your time crunched schedule where you do the high intensity stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It is entirely up to you. Find out which method works best for you with the time that's available to you. But the important thing is that you control it, you plan it out well, and make the most of that time available to you. On which note, I mean, we're 2-3 coffees down. I think it's time we go and get some high intensity intervals in, James.
Really? I don't think I've done enough base miles to do high intensity intervals more.
Oh, bloody hell.
What? Did I miss something?